Welcome in our recruiting guy. We claim him. Don't know if we should or not, but we're going to. Bryan Munson of Husker Online. Check him out, part of the On3 network. Bryan, it's been far too long. It's my fault. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Austin. What's up, man? I'm good.
Not too much going on here. Plenty in your world, though. Lots of recruiting news. And, of course, the headline for you guys over there at Husker Online, the Nebraska Instate Tour. Let's break it up this way, Bryan. Let's start with prospects outside of Lincoln and Omaha. Throughout the in-state tour, was there anyone that stood out to you outside of the Lincoln and Omaha places?
Ryman Ziebert is obviously probably the top of that list. The big tight end has probably been the most consistent riser outside the two, major cities. He's picked up some really nice offers, Wisconsin, Miami. I just feel like there were so many schools that were just, they needed to verify whether or not they felt like he could put on the weight, he could carry the weight. I think it really kind of started to happen with Miami. And then he took the visit to Wisconsin and he picked up an offer there. Outside of that, Connor Booth, obviously being the Nebraska commitment at Wahoo Bishop Newman is one to talk about. He showed up yesterday. 6'1". He was about 205 pounds, and I talked to his dad this morning. He was a little bit surprised that he was that light, but they're getting back into the swing of things. I think the big news with Connor, that people need to kind of look forward to a little bit here is that, he spends his time really dedicated to kind of supporting two sports. So during the summer, like he starts spring baseball today, and then, he would be rolling right into playing for the prospects this summer and doing travel ball and going all over the place. And he's really backing down on a lot of that. He's gonna back off on, making those long trips and, going states away to play in tournaments. He's going to play a lot more of the local stuff, but he is going to spend a lot more time really working on, getting ready to play college football. So I think that that's a good one. Here's another one for you, though, too. I caught up with him on Friday because Kearney High School wasn't going to be able to make it down on Sunday. Sawyer Schilke out of Kearney High School. I think people need to kind of know that name a little bit. Already has an offer from Northern Illinois, 6'3", 225 pounds. Nebraska is really keeping close tabs on him. I think that Nebraska wants to see him run a 40, see where that would be at. I think that they do see him, like right now, I think they see him more as like a middle linebacker, but he plays kind of a multi-purpose tool kind of guy. He kind of defensive end, outside linebacker, walk up, 2-point guy, and then rolls back to Mike a little bit for the Bearcats. But I think Schilke is a guy that's going to have a lot more teams, looking at him, particularly after the evaluation period, after he gets back into some football shape. He finished third at state Class A in the 215-pound class at the wrestling meet. So yeah, I'd say Schilke, Booth, Ziebert. Those are three guys that I think right now kind of come off the top of my head as guys to kind of keep an eye on.
Before we get to Lincoln and Omaha, I want to follow up on what you just said about he's just a football player, right? They use him in different ways. Bryan, I think when we look at this Nebraska staff and the way they recruit, it seems like there are two guys they go for, either the all-around football players that they can mold and find the best position, or the raw athletes that they think they can teach the game. Do you notice Nebraska going after one of those types of guys at certain positions, or is it just, hey, good football player, good athlete, plug him in?
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. It's such a great observation, Austin, because I do feel like they do that a lot. I think that there are players in this class that potentially have that ability. I think even a guy is, that hasn't played the defense position, like a Jackson Carpenter. Like if you really looked long and hard and you saw the measurables, you'd say, man, that could be an in-the-box safety. He could be a guy that's playing some sort of defensive back position for Nebraska potentially, if that's what he wanted to do, or that's where, if they could talk him into go ahead and moving over there. But realistically, I mean, he's not had any time on the defensive side of the football, but he has great measurements. He's gonna be a really fun player, I think, for people to watch this year after all the improvements he made in track last season. I mean, if he could crack 10.5. And he was just jumping 39 inches in the vertical, He's one of the better, just, top to bottom athletes. And you put him at that 6'3", 190-pound range right there, and just basically skinny, and just, looks like he could put on 10 pounds overnight and not know where it goes. I mean, there's a few of those guys in the state that I think could do that. Caprice Keith, another player that I think, you just can't limit him. I mean, he's a guy that can play offense or defense. He's a wide receiver. He's a defensive back. Those are some really interesting guys to kind of see and watch this fall.
Speaking of wide receiver, defensive back, again, I promise we'll get back to the in-state tour. Jeremiah Charles, right, wins the dunk contest at halftime of Nebraska men's basketball game yesterday. We knew he was a great athlete coming out, but Bryan, in recruiting, how much of a tool is that for Matt Rule to say, hey, look, you can come here, you can have fun, right? We're not going to restrict you from doing these other things, like obviously within reason. Just how cool is that a recruiting tool Nebraska football can use?
I mean, absolutely. I think they can go back and, they're looking for athletes. They're looking for raw guys. They can say, look, we aren't just here to work. We're here to have fun. We're a family. I went and saw Jeremiah Charles play basketball when he was at Arlington Martin. Fantastic athlete. I saw some outrageous dunks. I think he had 4 or 5 dunks in the game that I went to and watched. Yeah. And he has got some major hops. His brother was he has a twin brother that was actually going to either New Mexico or New Mexico State to play football. Jeremiah was kind of the more raw athlete of the two. Didn't play a lot of football. Was more of a basketball track guy, and just was kind of coming into his own. Honestly, is how I would kind of go ahead and phrase it. But I think that there's a lot to be said about Matt Rule's, allowing these players to do other things. I think not just with the fun things of a dunk contest, but, allowing Charles and other players to run track. Connor Booth is going to play, football and baseball. You have Nash Hutmacher that's wrestling and playing football. You're going to have some people that are going to ask, Tyson Terry if he's going to be interested in staying on the mat for a little while too. Which of course he told us in Omaha that he was, and he's really got NFL dreams. But I think that's a huge thing, and I think Matt Rule kind of understands. Like, look, it's okay for those guys to kind of split, and be productive doing these other things. It's good for me because they're these multi-sport athletes. But I think he also wants to kind of, be honest with each other and say, like, look. Yeah, if you were playing baseball and you were leading off, or you were kind of that top guy off the bench, in a rotation in the outfield or whatever, but you haven't seen any or you haven't seen any time so far this spring, why don't you go and come on back and let Coach Campbell keep working with you? Because I think there'll be a role for you in the fall. I think it's going to come down to, that kind of assessment was going to need to have to be reviewed, I think, for all those guys that are splitting time and missing time, working out winter conditioning into spring football, and even into summer sports a little bit, like when they're out there doing other things.
We're talking Husker football recruiting with Bryan Munson of Husker Online here in our Allo VIP line. You mentioned Jackson Carpenter in Lincoln. Anything else to add on him or anyone else that stood out to you from the Lincoln leg of the in-state tour?
Oh, Cole Erickson's an interesting dude at Southwest. I think what's going to be interesting to see about Cole is he's going to test incredibly well. He is a very conditioned. He has tested well so far, going back to last season. It's interesting to watch his body. His dad played offensive tackle for Texas Tech. His mom played volleyball for Texas Tech. He's got some of those genes there that potentially, maybe he's not done growing quite yet. So he's an interesting guy to go ahead and keep a look, to keep an eye on. We saw Ren Brown. That's maybe another guy outside of Lincoln too that I failed to mention from Stanton. I think he came in at 6'5", maybe 6'5.5", and he's really been a guy that's kind of taken off here recently. He's got a couple D2 offers, but he's got Wyoming and couple in Nebraska kind of keeping tabs on him. I think it's just he's a eight man football guy. It's going to be really kind of harder, I think, to see him kind of playing offensive tackle stuff, but maybe he could play on the offensive line, the the interior side of things. So that's a guy to kind of keep an eye on there. Connor Booth, mentioned him before. I tell you what, here's an interesting one that I liked because I bumped into his dad, and he's from Columbus. Ty Tessendorf from Blair. Ty Tessendorf is a freshman, played the last 4 or 5 games for Blair at right tackle. I think he's about 6'3.5", 255 pounds as a freshman. And I seen that kid at Nebraska football camp a couple of years ago when I ran into his dad earlier on too, when my son was up there. He has really put on some nice size in the last couple of years. Look for a bigger role out of him this year at Blair. Blair's going to have a decent little football team again, even having replaced their starting quarterback.
Popping around the Omaha Metro, not into Omaha yet, but your Elkhorns, Millards, Gretnas, Bellevues, any of those schools have anyone that stood out to you on the in-state tour?
Last year, Omaha West Side rolled through the door, and you had Benning, and you had the Rezaks, and you had Christian Jones, and you just had these guys that you go, wow. There are 6 or 7 D1 guys here, and you just felt like they were kind of putting the state, kind of on here's what we're coming for. We're coming for that state title. And they went after it and they got it. And I felt like this year the team that kind of looked that way a little bit was Millard South. Millard South. Jet Tamala is probably the most surprising guy that I saw in Omaha because he startled me with his frame. He's a 6'4.5" guy. I didn't think I was going to give him that type of credit. From watching this, I was like, oh, this is it's obviously a little exaggerated. He's legit 6'4.5", and he has got some real weapons. With Chase Lofton transferring over there, Isaac Jensen, who's the other tight end opposite him that now has an offer from Nebraska. Marion Jackson, who was a 1,000-yard receiver last season. I think some people would pick on the fact that maybe they don't have that starting running back to kind of go along with it, but they have got some weapons. And Tamala is really a fun quarterback, to watch. And it's hard to kind of skip over Omaha North because Tyson Terry, he was fresh off of his 3rd state title. He's still undefeated. He shows up, he's 6'3.5". He's 268 pounds, I think is what he was at. Just in fantastic shape. It absolutely looks ready to go. I mean, just looks physically ready to play at the next level. And this is a guy that has another year. Pierce Blueberry, really interesting guy. In another year of tight ends being a standout position around the state. I don't know when and where that this all happened, but it's happened that Nebraska is being known for all the tight ends they produce on an annual basis. But Blueberry is a legitimate guy that could play either side of the football. And I think he's hearing about it from some schools. So keep an eye on him. I really think that he's a guy that can test well, and we'll see what ends up happening there. But Iowa State's definitely a team to kind of keep an eye on with him.
We're talking with Bryan Munson of Husker Online about the in-state tour that they just went through. Follow Bryan on Twitter. Check out Husker Online for any of that news if you missed anything or are curious about anything else we didn't get into. A couple more for you here, Bryan, as it relates to official visits that have been set. I'm sure we've had this conversation. I forget what your answer was. Nebraska, is that a school that does better being the first impression, being the first official visit for a guy? Is it better in the middle? Is it best to be the last official visit from Nebraska's standpoint? Wow,
what a great question. History would tell you that it's a little bit in the middle on being the first. I think that there are some guys that Nebraska or that basically are feeling like Nebraska could be home. And then I feel like there's also some times where Nebraska brings in a very heralded player, a highly heralded player that's never seen Nebraska before, coming in there, eyes open, and has 4 other official visits set up, through the month of June. And it just seems like it trails off. Nebraska had that happen a little bit last year. It's happened before under Mickey Joseph and Scott Frost. It's just a matter, I think, of like how they're going to go about kind of setting this thing up. I think I think they're doing a great job of lining up some guys to come in April, particularly ones that have never seen a game, and Nebraska obviously they're not going to have a bunch of official visits in the month of September and October. So this is about as close to an environment as what you're ever going to see. So they're bringing in like their top quarterback, and TJ Lateef. They're bringing in some other guys that haven't seen a home game at Memorial Stadium before. So you got an ability to kind of share that with them a little bit when it comes to like being a spring game. Then I think I think they're doing a great job scheduling official visits with some guys from a couple of like out of region is what I would kind of keep tending to call them, because they haven't really nailed down any players from Instate. They haven't really got anybody from like the neighboring states or inside the radius guys. They're really from players that are from a lot further away. So I think that it's a way of kind of narrowing things down, I think, a little bit for Nebraska to figure out like where they're at with some guys. But it's kind of 50-50, though, going back to your original question. Sometimes it works out really well, and I think it really comes down to where Nebraska kind of sits at on their list. And if it seems like they have a player, though, that's destined to take, the next 4 visits, and they have the next 4 kind of scheduled when they show up, that's the one right there that usually doesn't prove in very well for Nebraska. They usually set a high bar, but then it seems like something happens like right after the visit, and the player's off to other schools, and just seems like communication kind of dies down naturally.
So Nebraska's the last visit for interior offensive lineman Marcus Garcia. He'll be here on April 26th after a pretty nice SEC tour. Also Michigan and Florida State. You also look at Houston Kaihana Torres from out west. What do we need to know about those two guys, Bryan?
Houston is a guy that's visited Nebraska before. He's been there in April, last April. I think Nebraska is very much in the picture with him. I think that Coach Raiola has done a fantastic job in recruiting him. I know that his plan was at one time to get over to the Poly Bowl so he could go ahead and check out, Dylan Raiola and see how that game was going to go. But I think that, this is, and obviously he's one of 2 guys from Hawaii that Nebraska has scheduled to come in for an official visit this summer. I think Nebraska is very serious about keeping things open, with players from Hawaii. I think that they've got obviously a very good thing going with having Donovan Raiola on the staff, Dylan Raiola on the roster, guys, local legends like Dominic that can kind of go over there. I think that it's such a terrific story. I think Nebraska should try to ride that wave as long as they can. But yeah, I think things look good. I think things look good with Torres. I know you asked about Marcus Garcia too from Denton Ryan. Mm-hmm. Denton Ryan just being up the road, obviously former high school of defensive end Josh Williams, who was at Nebraska in the early 2000s. Great district. I don't know a lot about him as a player, a 4-star guy, but TCU is a school that's been pushing very hard to kind of keep him local. I know that for Nebraska to kind of keep hitting on those schools that are north, like Argyle, where you got Van Poppel. There was a couple other players last year that Nebraska was in on too. There's even a couple from Denton, different high schools that Nebraska was still trying to get to visit. So good football, obviously up there with Geyer and Ryan and both high schools up there. And I think it's a good situation for Nebraska. They got a 4-star interior offensive lineman from the Dallas Metroplex that wants to visit this summer on an official visit.
Last one for you then, Bryan. A little PTSD seeing this high school pop up. Lancaster, Emanuel Choice, a 4-star wide receiver. A&M, Nebraska, USC, and TCU are his official visits. What do we need to know about Emanuel Choice from Kawan Lacey's team?
Yeah, I met Emanuel last year through the process. I just he's an amazing talent. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He is super long. He has tremendous hands. I got a picture of him last year that just blew the coach's socks off, because there was no way he was supposed to make this catch. The corner had made a great cut on the ball. It looked like he was headed the other way, and Emanuel just pulled it in. He's a strong kid. He's an incredibly strong guy, but he is going to be very popular. I mean, you've got A&M. I know that one school that wasn't even on the top 4 that has been very serious about him has been Oklahoma. So keep an eye out on that one too. I mean, Emanuel's a guy that you can't ignore him. He's such an amazing talent. But yeah, that should be an interesting one for Nebraska fans because Emanuel and Kewan were very close last year as part of that offense at Lancaster.
Make sure you follow Bryan Munson on Twitter at Bryan Munson. I believe it was an underscore after. Yeah, Bryan Munson _ Check him out. Husker Online, part of the On3 network. Bryan, we appreciate your time as always. Take care, my friend.
All right. See you, man.